Hello everyone. I'm very excited for today's webinar, How to Build Great Products the Lean Startup Way. I'm Vasil and I produce all of the webinars at Business to Community. I'm also a founder at the Growth Marketing Conference, Silicon Valley's largest growth marketing event that will bring together over 500 CEOs and founders this December. Before we get started and before I pass the mic to Dan, a few housekeeping reminders. The presentation is being recorded and it will be available on demand within 48 hours of today's broadcast. If you have any questions for Dan at any point, you can type them into the chat box located in the lower corner of your screen. And also, if you would like to tweet, you can tweet with the hashtag #GrowthMarketingConf. I'm very excited to introduce our presenter today, Dan Olsen, who is a product management consultant and author. Just recently wrote a great book. At Olsen Solutions, Dan works with CEOs and founders, product leaders to build great product, and he always often steps in as VP of product. His clients include Facebook, Box, Microsoft, Medallia, and many others. Dan also led Quicken product team at Intuit, and he was CEO and founder of TechCrunch award-winning startup Your Version a few years back. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Dan. Dan, please take it away.
Vasil, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It's great to talk with you guys today. So I'm going to be talking about how to build great products the Lean Startup Way, which is basically summarizing some of the key ideas from my book, The Lean Product Playbook. Vasil covered my background briefly, just so you guys know. I find it's helpful to know where a speaker's coming from before you hear them talk. I started out with an engineering background, then got an MBA, and I've spent a lot of time investing in learning UX design as well as web and mobile coding. And experience-wise, I've basically been working in product management for over 20 years. I led Quicken Product Management at Intuit. I also led product management at Friendster, the first social network. I've been a CEO and co-founder as well of a startup, personalized news startup called Your Version. And then I kind of stumbled into being a product consultant and really enjoy it a lot, getting to work with various product teams and companies. And some of my clients have been Facebook, Box, Microsoft, helping apply the concepts that I'll be sharing with you guys today. And I also run a meetup out here in Silicon Valley, Lean Product, Lean UX meetup. In case you're local and you want to attend, you can check that out. I'll share the link to that later. I do try to, because I want to give you guys a playbook, like a step-by-step guide, I have to cover a lot of content. So I go a little fast, but don't worry about taking notes and trying to keep up too much on taking notes, because I always post my slides at slideshare.net/Dan_O. Okay? So let's jump in. When I used to give this talk years ago, I used to ask, who's heard of Lean Startup? And ask people to raise their hands. Nowadays, I ask who hasn't heard of Lean Startup, and I usually don't get too many hands. And if you had to summarize what it was all about, I think the key points are the ones listed here. One, it's about being explicit about your hypotheses. It's about figuring out the fastest way to test those hypotheses. It's about deliberately keeping your scope small with a minimum viable product approach. It's about testing your hypotheses with customers. And it's about learning and iterating as quickly as you can, with the goal of achieving higher and higher product market fit. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with these high-level concepts. When we talk about it, when we list them as bullet points on a slide, it sounds pretty easy, right? But what I've found is a lot of people have read the book or read the blog post. They're really excited about Lean Startup concepts. Then they go and they try to apply them, and they run into challenges. And so it's not for any lack of motivation or high-level understanding. It's about a lack of understanding the details of what to do, and that's what my talk's going to be about. The closest analogy I can think of is when January 1st rolls around, a lot of people decide, okay, I'm going to get in better shape. I'm going to join a gym, and they buy some workout clothes, and they're highly motivated. They know they need to work out to get in better shape. They show up at the gym, and then they have no idea what to do. Right, so maybe they're like this guy. And it's exactly the same situation. Again, it's not for any lack of motivation or lack of understanding at a high level that you need to work out. Maybe you're like this guy where you're kind of winging it with your buddy. You're not quite sure what to do, but you're making stuff up. Or maybe you're like this guy where you're just feeling completely overwhelmed and over your head. And so that's, again, why I wrote the Lean Product Playbook. What sets it apart from other books is, one, it gives you a 6-step process for how to achieve product market fit, which I'm going to be covering in my talk today. And secondly, it's very, very comprehensive. It basically covers everything you need to know, soup to nuts, to build a great product. If you want to win a signed copy of the book, what I like to do during my talks is ask people to tweet, and basically then I pick a random winner from the people that are tweeting. Be sure to include my hashtag at Dan Olsen, DANOLSEN. It's in the bottom right of the slides if you need to remember it. Please use a hashtag like Lean Startup or UX or Prod Management. If there's a slide that you like, feel free to do a screen grab and attach that. And then if you want to include the link to the book, it's tiny.cc/LPP, either lowercase or uppercase. So again, it's just a way to kind of like give a book away if people want to try to win one on Twitter. Okay. The interesting thing is there are a lot of buzzwords with Lean Startup and a lot of different definitions flying around on the internet for some of these terms. The interesting thing about product market fit is a lot of people use the term, but there isn't really a formal definition of it. Mark Andreessen coined the term back in 2007 in a blog post. And my first thing when I sat down to write the book and working with my clients over the years is like, okay, if we want to achieve product market fit, we have to have like an actionable model that we can use to get there. And so I created a framework called the product market fit pyramid that I want to walk you through. And it's basically a pyramid. The bottom two layers are the market. So it all starts with your target customer. Like, who is this product designed to help out? And the layer above that is that particular target customer's needs. So this is a hierarchical model where each model kind of builds and depends on the layer beneath it. And here I specifically use the word underserved needs, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's like we don't want to meet needs that are already met in a satisfactory manner. We want to meet the underserved needs. So taken together, the target customer and their needs, that's what a market is. And that persists over time regardless of the products that meet those needs. In the book I talk about how listening to music changed from radios to Walkman to MP3 players to iPhones, right? The market was always the same as people who wanted to listen to music on the go. On the top, we've got the product, and your product consists of three layers. It starts at the bottom with your value proposition. This is how is your product intended to be better or different than the other alternatives that are out there. The next layer up, feature set, is the functionality that delivers those benefits to the customer. And then the final top of the pyramid layer is user experience. What's the user experience that delivers that functionality to the target customers? And how well your product fits with the market, that's product market fit, which sits in between those two parts of the pyramid. So once I had this actionable model of product market fit, I said, okay, I can create a process around this, right? Let's create it, and I call it the lean product process, and it consists of 6 steps. Basically, we work our way through the pyramid, and we start out by identifying who's our target customer. Then we determine what are their underserved needs. Then we go, okay, out of all the needs that we could deliver, how is our product going to be better or different in meeting those needs than other products that are out there? We define our feature set, and this is where we want to take an MVP approach so we don't overbuild. We create a user experience. And then once we have a prototype that we can test with customers, we test with customers, right? And we iterate through that loop. So this is the 6 steps of lean product process we're going to walk you through today. And again, product market fit is just how well, as we're trying to test with customers to see how the top part and the bottom part of the pyramid fit together. And then as we're going through this, we're taking an iterative approach, basically, where we are hypothesizing, coming up with hypothesizing, designing tests, testing, learning, and then revising our hypotheses as we go through that pyramid. So let's start off with the first step, which is determining your target customer. And this may seem a little overwhelming. It's okay to have a tentative hypothesis here. But let me explain why it's so important. And to work on those 2 layers in parallel, the underserved needs and the target customer, those are very closely coupled. So it's okay not to know exactly who your target customer is, but you'll see each target customer has distinct needs. So we do eventually need to get specific about it. Let me walk through an example of a high-level need that most of us have, which is transportation within 100 miles of our home. We all have a need to get around, to go to work or go to school or whatever it is, go to the store, go shopping, within 100 miles of our home. So it's a very common need. But the whole thing about customer needs and why it's so dependent on the target customer is that different target customers have different detailed needs. So it's a bit like an onion where there's more detailed layers beneath. So let's take 2 different target customers, the soccer mom and the speed demon, say. And they're going to have, even though they both share that common high-level need, they have very different detailed needs. The soccer mom may care more about having enough room in her car to carry her kids and their gear. safety and fuel economy. The speed demon may care more about just going fast, making sure his car looks cool, having his car make him look cool, right? And that leads to very different ideal products for those different target customers, even though, again, they share that high-level common need. And this is where personas come in. In the book, I talk about in detail about personas and segmentation criteria, which are typically used in UX design, but can be used very early on in a lean product process like this. The second step is identifying underserved customer needs. And an important concept when you're talking about customer needs or benefits is problem space versus solution space. And I've been excited to see these terms being used more and more since I've been giving my talk. So let me explain them. On the left is problem space. Problem space is basically a customer problem, customer need, or a benefit that the product should address. It's a well-written product requirement, or it's a well-written agile user story, for example. In contrast, solution space is a specific implementation to address that need or requirement. So if you go and build a product, that's in the solution space, right? And there are plenty of examples of companies just jump right into solution space and start coding or building something without really thinking that much in the problem space. Also, if you create a mock-up or a wireframe, that's in the solution space as well, right? And to illustrate this example, I like to use this example. When NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use here on Earth weren't going to work because of no gravity. And so they needed something that would write in space. And it wasn't NASA, it was actually one of their subcontractors, Fisher, that went out of their way. They proacted, and NASA didn't ask them to, but they went out of their way, spent $1 million in R&D, and came up with the space pen. Now, maybe some of you have seen it. They're awesome. They do write in zero gravity. You can write with them upside down, right on, they're very cool and impressive. Faced with the same challenge of writing in space, the Russian Space Agency gave their astronauts pencils. And you can actually find a Russian space pen. It's just a pencil in a box. It's a joke. The idea is just if these two solutions were equivalent as far as how well they met the needs, then obviously the one that didn't take $1 million of R&D and didn't take all that time to develop is superior, right? And so the other lesson here is by saying, if you articulate your requirement by saying, hey, we need a pen that writes in space, using the word pen in your problem space, you've already actually specified solution space. The word pen is the solution, right? And so we have already kind of constrained a set of possible solutions. If instead you said we need a way to take notes in space or record notes in space, then it would be more abstract than staying in the problem space. Now the reality, I always like to point this out, is that you don't actually want pens and pencils in space because the lead tips break off and get into things. The wood is flammable. So at the end of the day, everyone uses space pens and they work great. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, again, to be really clear about problem space versus solution space. Let me illustrate with a software example that's closer to home. Again, we have problem space on the left, solution space on the right. When I worked at Intuit, I worked on Quicken, which is one of our leading products. Another leading product is TurboTax that helps people do their taxes, basically. And it's in the solution space because it's a product. And it competed with TaxCut, another solution space product. And what we can do is we can map back and say, okay, these solutions, what at a high level, if we had to nail down a single benefit that they are intending to deliver, what is that? It would be something like prepare my taxes or help me prepare my taxes. And Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, also helped me kind of appreciate problem space versus solution space, because he would always ask people, hey, who's the biggest competitor to TurboTax? And all the product managers would raise their hand and he'd pick one, and they would yell out TaxCut. And he would say, no, it's actually pen and paper, because at the time, more Americans were doing their taxes with pen and paper than with any tax software at all. So that's the other advantage of being clear about problem space versus solution space. Like I said, the target customer and their needs don't change as much over time. What changes over time more frequently are the solutions, right? And so you can really understand what are the true alternatives to my product and the benefits I'm trying to deliver. Now, once you have a software product, again, we can peel the onion. It can provide many more detailed benefits than just the high-level benefit of preparing my taxes. It can help you check your taxes, right? Computers are great at math. It can help you file your taxes. Instead of going and standing in line, you can, at the post office, you can go just push a button and file them electronically via the internet. It can help you maximize deductions by walking you through a wizard and asking you questions. It can reduce your audit risk by flagging things that you should probably check out, before you submit your claims. And so that's the thing about the problem space, is we can peel the onion and get more and more detailed about these benefits that we could provide. And we can even go down to the feature level. So, other things that TurboTax could do, it can check your return. Here's 3 related benefits. And when you brainstorm all these benefits and you talk to customers and you form your mental model, you'll find that there are clusters of related benefits. So these three, for example, are all related to, if you ask people kind of a 5 whys approach, so why is that important to you? Why is that important to you? We'd eventually get things, them saying things related to empowerment or confidence. Like, hey, before TurboTax, I just didn't even feel confident in doing my taxes at all. I didn't feel like I could do them at all. Likewise, there might be a separate set of benefits that all relate to save time. Saving time preparing your taxes, saving time filing your taxes. And each of these, we call this a benefits ladder, where people will say things, customers will say things at different levels of specificity and using different words. But at the end of the day, these all ladder up to these macro benefits. There could be a third ladder, save money, right? By, for example, helping you maximize your tax deductions. So the goal is to come up with this kind of structured, hierarchical view of the problem space of what are all the customer needs that we could address. And then, the features map to them. And in a well-designed product, usually there's often a one-for-one mapping, and a well-named feature makes it very clear what benefit that feature is providing. So you can see here for TurboTax, I've listed all the different features, and each one maps to each of those benefits. So it makes it clear to people that the product provides that benefit. Now, when you do this, say you do have a robust definition of the problem space, you end up with like dozens of potential customer needs that you could address. The next question that comes up when you're building a new product or making improvements to a product, I should mention that this also applies not only to building a new V1 product, but improving a product or building a V2, for example, or an extension or add-on, is how do we prioritize? We have dozens that we could address. Which one should we spend our precious time and resources addressing? And this is where the concept of importance versus satisfaction comes in. And I developed this when I was at Intuit, and then I was excited to see that a couple other thought leaders had come up with somewhat related frameworks that I'll share in a minute. But basically, importance of user need is on, let's put that on the vertical axis from low to high. And the user satisfaction, that is with current alternatives. So whatever they're using now to get that user need met, how satisfied are they with that? Again, from low to high. And to simplify things, and because I'm an MBA, I like to make 2x2s. So we'll make a 2x2 here and talk about these 4 quadrants and talk about each one. Now, the bottom 2 quadrants, basically, it's low importance of user need. Whether it's low satisfaction or high satisfaction, at the end of the day, at the outset of a project, these just aren't really worth pursuing, right? Because it's, at the end of the day, it's a low importance user need. So even if people aren't satisfied, if we could pick any customer problem to work on, why would we pick this, right? We should try to find a higher importance user need to work on. In the upper right quadrant now, we've got high importance of user need, so that's better. But we also have a high satisfaction with the current alternatives. So this is very competitive. So this would be an example, if you think, for example, of search, finding things on the internet. Google is doing a pretty good job for most people there. And if you were to say, let's do a search engine, in the book I actually talk about a search engine that tried to take on Google that was called Cool and how they failed to do so. And part of it is just a lack of differentiation, right? If you're going to take someone on up in that space, you need to be like 10x better. And we'll talk about performance benefits in a second. Now, the other quadrant in the upper left, we have high importance of user need, but now we have low satisfaction. This is where there is large opportunity, right? This is where there are what I call underserved needs are in this quadrant. And in the book, I talk about Uber as an example here. Now, Uber's done a lot of things well to generate the success that they've done as far as execution on the product and operations and marketing. But I also think a big part of why they're so successful is because they fundamentally address an upper left quadrant opportunity. If we don't even have to do the surveys. You can imagine if you surveyed 100 people that rode taxis and said, hey, please rate your satisfaction with the cleanliness of the cab, with how polite your driver was, with how safe he felt, with how convenient it was to pay the person. You can easily imagine low satisfaction scores on those kind of questions. Okay? And the other thing about my framework is I actually mean it to be a visual representation of how much value you're creating. So if there is a product that's addressing this important user need with this level of satisfaction, I'm trying to say that that area that it creates, that rectangle there, that's the amount of customer value. And if there's a separate product up here that's addressing a higher importance need with higher user satisfaction, it's creating that much more value. And then if you look to the right, basically, that's the opportunity to create more customer value for an existing product, right? It's by increasing the satisfaction of how well you're meeting their user needs. So it's meant to be a visual framework, and the area on this importance versus satisfaction grid is basically how much value you're creating. Now, if this all seems kind of theoretical and abstract, let me share some real data with you. This is from a product that I worked on, and we basically asked thousands of users to rate importance and satisfaction for 13 key features. Our product had 13 important features, each which had a benefit. And we asked people to rate it. And you can see that there's a spread in the data. The first thing I noticed as a product manager was this point up here. So there's a feature that was 100% importance and 98% satisfaction. So I was really excited. I'm like, this is awesome. We did a great job here. My second thought was, and by the way, I don't need to spend any engineering resources here. I can go focus on other higher priority items, right? Such as this item. If I had to look and say, gosh, what's in the upper left corner here? What is high importance but relatively low satisfaction? This is the standout. And by fixing this and moving that to the right, we basically could increase overall satisfaction with the product. And if this idea of getting quantitative and analytical with importance and satisfaction resonates with you, I highly recommend reading Anthony Olick's book, What Customers Want. He's one of the other thought leaders I mentioned who has kind of a similar framework, has some similar concepts to it. Another model, the Kano model, I'm also excited you start to hear more about this. I actually studied, so before I moved out to Silicon Valley, I studied lean manufacturing in a graduate program, and I learned about the Kano model, which came out of the quality movement. But it also talks about customer needs, and it focuses on satisfaction. So here the framework on the vertical axis, it goes from being completely dissatisfied to being completely satisfied. And then on the horizontal axis, from how fully is the need met, from not met at all on the left to fully met on the right. And the beauty of the Kano model is it breaks all the customer needs and features down into one of three types. The first type is performance benefit. More is better. I mentioned if you want to take someone on in the upper right quadrant, you need to be like, there's a saying, you need to be 10x better. Here, say we were shopping for cars, and there were two cars, and they looked pretty similar, and they looked almost identical, and we thought they both were great. But then we realized, hey, car A has twice the miles per gallon than car B. Well, we would prefer car A because all other things being equal, miles per gallon fuel efficiency is a performance benefit for cars. All right, so that's an example of a performance benefit. The second category is must-haves. So here, the absence, having a must-have doesn't actually make anybody happy or satisfied, but not having it makes them unhappy or dissatisfied. So the example here would be seatbelts. Say you were looking at a car and you read the specs on the window and you said, this looks great, I think it looks great, it's going to meet my needs. And you look inside and you realize it doesn't have any seatbelts, right? But if there were two cars and one car had 5 seatbelts and one had 100, you wouldn't say car B is 20 times better than car A, right? Once you have one seatbelt per passenger, you're checked off. So that's the nature of must-haves. The final category is delighters. So here, not having it doesn't cause a problem because no one's really expecting it. But by having this delighter, you can create a lot of customer satisfaction, a lot of customer value. And so the example sticking with cars from years ago was like the first car that had GPS navigation. It fundamentally changed how those people, got from point A to point B. Before that, people would print out maps or they'd get lost. And so that was a new delighter. But the thing is, over time, things migrate. The things that were delighters become performance benefits and become must-haves over time. As you know, more and more cars have GPS navigation. And so the bar is constantly raising at different rates for different categories. Okay? So that's what we want to use those techniques to prioritize. Then the next thing is to actually specify, okay, which things are we actually going to focus on? What is our value proposition? Which benefits of all the ones we could address are we going to address? And how are we going to be better than our competitors? And this is where we can put the Kano model to use. And basically, the way to do it is, let me walk you through this table, is on the left-hand side to list the must-have benefits, performance benefits, and delighters for your category. And just list them out. And I kept them generic here so you can imagine what they would be in your space. And then list the key competitors. We have competitor A here, competitor B, and then list your product. What you want to do is rate everybody on each of these for each of these cells. And so we can see here that, for example, everyone has the must-haves. Because you have to. Competitor A is better at performance benefit 1. They're the best of everybody. Competitor B is the best at performance benefit 2. And we're building a new product, and rather than trying to take A on or B on at what they're best at, we've identified a third performance benefit that neither of them are doing a great job on. Maybe we found some underserved segment of the market, or maybe we have some new technology that can better address these needs that they don't have. And so that's going to be our performance benefit that we're going to go for. And then, because competitor A has a delighter, and then we have a delighter. We have ideas for a delighter. At the end of the day, the differentiators, you're not going to differentiate on must-haves. It's the performance benefits where you plan to be better than the competition and your unique delighters. That's what we call differentiators. Okay, so that's your value prop. And then the next thing we need to do is we don't want to boil the ocean and spend a year building things only to find out we're wrong. We want to find a better way to test our hypotheses sooner, right? And so that's where the idea of an MVP, minimal viable product, comes in. This is probably the most misused concept that I see, misused the most, I should say, from Lean Startup. And a great way to explain the right way to do an MVP is to use this framework from Aaron Walter's book, Designing for Emotion. A designer named Jesse Pisana adapted his framework, Aaron's framework, and then I adapted Jesse, so I just want to give them credit. But basically, it's a way of talking about a product in 4 parts. Again, it's a pyramid where there's a hierarchy, and we talk about how functional is a product, how reliable is a product, how usable is a product, how delightful is a product, right? And obviously, the biggest mistake you can make with an MVP is try to build the whole pyramid all at once. You don't want to build the whole pyramid all at once. It defeats the purpose, right? And so what you want to do is just build a subset to test the critical subset to test your key hypotheses. But the biggest mistake I see people make is this, where the green shows, okay, which part of the pyramid are we going to try to bite off with our MVP? Now, they are biting off a subset of functionality, which is great. They're not building the whole set of functionality, but they're pretty much ignoring or neglecting reliability, usability, and delight. So that's not the way you want to do it. It's true you only want to do a slice of the pyramid with your MVP, but this is how the slice should be, a subset of functionality. But whatever subset you build, it needs to be reliable enough, usable enough, and delightful enough, right? And there's increasing talk about user delight. Usability is, can I use it? Delight is, do I want to use it? And basically, I see time and again people build an MVP and use it as an excuse. Say, it doesn't matter if it's buggy, it doesn't matter if it's not, it doesn't look good or if it's hard to use. It's just an MVP. Well, big surprise, when you go and test MVPs on the left, they don't test well, right? Because people can't even see the functional benefits because of the other issues that are in their way. So we want to identify what's that critical subset of functionality. In the book, I go into much more detail about how to identify that. I don't have time in this talk to get into that detail. But then the next step, once we've agreed on our MVP feature set, is to create a prototype, right? This whole time we've been talking about ideas, and now it's time to get something that we can put in front of customers. And this is where UX design comes into the process, right? Up until now, we've been talking about benefits and features or functionality, and now we need to create a user experience that we can get feedback on. And I like to talk about UX design as an iceberg, because just like an iceberg, it can be misleading because only a little bit is visible above the water. And for UX design, that little portion that's visible is visual design. We are all visual creatures. We take in so much information through our eyes, colors, shapes, letters, everything. But when you use a product that's really good to use, that's really easy to use, that you enjoy using, it's because the product team behind that actually did a lot of great work with these other layers that build up the visual design. So at the bottom, we've got conceptual design. Like, what is the fundamental concept for how this product is going to work? In the book, I talk about Quicken. When Quicken launched, there were already 46 other personal finance software packages out there, but the founders realized, hey, none of these are easy enough to use. And they had a hypothesis at the time, everyone used checkbooks. If we just use a conceptual design of a checkbook for the user interface, then there'll be a shallow learning curve. Everyone would just figure out how to use it. They built a product and tested it and turned out that, yep, that was right. And so they quickly became the #1 personal finance package because of that, because of the conceptual design and UI design, even though it was a crowded space. Information architecture is how you're structuring the information and organizing your product. If it's hard to find things, then someone's not doing a good job on this layer. Next layer up is interaction design. Literally, how do our product and the customer interact with one another? Anything, navigation, any controls, forms, anything the user can click or tap, that's basically interaction design. And again, a good product team needs to be thinking about all these levels of the iceberg. Now, it's really important to have a prototype here because it ties back to problem space versus solution space. People aren't that good at talking in the problem space. Talking about needs and problems and benefits, it's kind of fuzzy and vague, and people use different terms. But they can do a good job reacting to solution space, right? If I've used an application for the last 3 years, I can definitely tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about it. Or I can pull up the screen and see, it really annoys me how I have to do this, or I really wish it could do X, or I really like how it does Y. Same thing when you give someone a high enough fidelity, a good enough prototype, they can react to it and tell you what they like or don't like. And so that's why we need to build something tangible. I use a UX prototype, basically. And I use prototype as a very generic umbrella term. Artifacts, design artifacts is another generic term. And there are several that we can use, and I like to categorize them by interactivity, how much can you click or tap on it and interact with it? How close to the real thing is this prototype providing on the vertical axis? Then fidelity, like how close to picture perfect to the final product does it seem? In the bottom left, we have the awesome hand sketch, right? Whether it's on paper or on a whiteboard, non-interactive at all, it's very low fidelity, but it's a great way for teams to get their ideas out there and iterate quickly. Now, in the traditional workflow, the next level up is a wireframe. In traditional workflow, it would be a static wireframe, which means you can't really interact with it. And then after your UX designer came up with a static wireframe, the visual designer would take it and create mock-ups, which are more, now mock-ups have color. The wireframes tend to be grayscale or black and white. You're not really worried about the fonts or the images. When you get to a mock-up now, we are worried about the pixels and the colors and the fonts and things like that. This is more the traditional workflow. But if you're still doing this workflow, I hate to say it, but it's kind of antiquated now because there are no tools out there that make it really easy to do a better workflow, which is clickable wireframes instead of static wireframes, right? So you achieve higher interactivity. You can make things clickable so that the user can kind of experience a user flow through multiple pages or screens. I've listed Balsamiq here. I'm a big fan of Balsamiq. Even if you're not technical, if you're not a designer, it makes it super easy to create wireframes that are clickable and create a story. And then again, in the old days, you would get a bunch of, image files that the designer had exported from Photoshop or Illustrator, and you'd have to sort out what to do with them. Now you can upload all those to a tool like InVision and then create little clickable hotspots that basically, okay, when they click here, go to this other mockup. When they click here, go to this other mockup. Again, you don't have to be technical. You don't have to be a designer. You can create a flow and a scenario where the person can go down. And if you test clickable mockups like that, especially with InVision, when it's in a browser or it's in a phone, so it actually feels and looks like the real thing, you can get really good feedback. And by the way, you didn't have to do any coding. And I've worked on several projects where by using this approach and getting to clickable mockups, we were able to invalidate some hypotheses and validate other hypotheses. It saved us tons of time. If you have, in rare cases, you may have a highly interactive product where it's worth actually building an interactive prototype, which is basically throwaway code, an HTML, CSS, or a mobile equivalent. And then finally, at the highest level of interactive fidelity, we have our live product, right? And just to quickly illustrate the difference, when people sometimes they mix up these terms or use them interchangeably. On the left, we have a wireframe. You can see it's from Balsamiq. It's grayscale, no images, no focus on fonts or visual treatment. Really focus on layout, what's there, what's the structure, how's it laid out, what's the relative size and relative position. On the right, we've got a mock-up. Now we've got colors, we've got detailed images, we've got detailed fonts. That's a mock-up, higher fidelity mock-up, okay? Now, common flow, a workflow for teams that works really well is to iterate on their own internally on hand sketches and iterate until you're happy. Then work on clickable wireframes. And once the team gets happy with the set of clickable wireframes, then test it with customers, right, and rinse and repeat until those test well enough and you address the top issues. Then you can move on to clickable mockups. Again, quick rounds of tests, waves of tests. I discussed how to do waves of user testing in the book of like 5 to 8 users at a time. Figure out what top things need to be fixed, which hypotheses need to be revised. And then once you've iterated with clickable mockups to the point where you've gotten really good customer feedback and positive and no major issues, you can feel very confident moving to live product. So this is a common workflow that I see teams use to move quickly, iterate quickly, not waste time coding things that aren't going to add value and reduce risk. Okay, and obviously once you get the live product out, you want to test that too just to make sure that it translated well to the live product. And that leads to the final step, which is testing your MVP. Now we have our MVP prototype. We want to test it with customers. And again, this is where a lot of people like, yeah, Dan, I'm down for doing user testing. I just don't know how to do it. So here's a template for how to do, and I call it ramen user testing because when I was at Intuit, we had an awesome, $1 million usability lab. Intuit was a pioneer in usability and user experience design. And it had, one-way mirror. We could watch the user, had cameras on their face, cameras on the screen. The reality is I've worked with tons of startups since then, and you just don't need that. You just need basically a user that's got their laptop or their phone, and they can come in and test, and that's really all you need. So I call it ramen user testing. And you want to spend the first 10 minutes or so doing warm-up, warming the person up so that they feel comfortable giving you good feedback and doing discovery. Don't just jump in and show them your product or your prototype right away. Spend some time talking about, the user needs. What are they using today to meet those needs? What do they like? What do they don't like? You're basically doing discovery in the problem space there and solution space. Then show them the feedback, show them your prototype, and try to get their feedback on it. This is a tricky thing to do where you don't want to be too directive. I like to be as non-directed as possible, as if you're not there, right? And so I'll put the prototype up, and I'll be like, some people will be like, okay, what do you want me to do? And my answer is do whatever you would do if you're home by yourself, because that's what, is going to be more prototypical for all the users out there. You're not going to be there to hold everyone's hand. So you just want to kind of be there like a robot, kind of not interfere with the test. Now, when they do say something interesting and say, oh, that was interesting, or, oh, I didn't expect that, that's when you jump in and you say, oh, can you tell me a bit more about that? Or, oh, what did you like about that? Or, what do you, it looks like you're having trouble. What were you trying to do? You want to ask questions in an objective way, again, that doesn't kind of perturb the test. And then at the end, to wrap up, basically, that's when you can break character, and if there were any issues or questions that came up, you can answer them. If they missed some features, you can point them out. And then it's really important to ask them if they would actually use the product at the end, right? Because when I did my startup, I practiced what I preach. I did 80 one-on-one user tests. And basically, the first 10, 15, we ran into UX issues and messaging issues and things like that. And once we had worked through those rough spots, the tests were starting to go pretty smooth. So then I decided, you know what, I'm going to start asking people if they would use the product. And to my surprise, about 15% of people said, no, I wouldn't use this at all. Even though the test had gone well, they hadn't run into a single user experience issue. They were able to use the product. They were able to use it properly. And I basically realized that it helped us refine our target market segmentation. There was a segment of the market that preferred to get their news a certain way. And our product just wasn't designed for that. So it helped us refine that. And that's the difference between product market fit and usability. So it's important to keep those two separate. Some quick do's and don'ts. At the beginning, most people don't like to hurt your feelings. So make sure that, hey, tell them not to worry about hurting your feelings, and that their feedback will actually help you improve the product. If they don't give you any constructive criticism, you're not really going to be able to make the product any better. Not everyone talks out loud. So there's a thing called the think aloud protocol where you encourage people to just try to speak what's going through their head, like stream of consciousness as they're going through. Try to be a fly on the wall. The biggest variable I see from inexperienced interviewers or moderators is the nature of the questions. And it basically comes down to not asking leading questions and not asking closed questions. So if I say, hey, that was easy, wasn't it? That's a leading question, right? And I see that a lot of people, they're vested or they're just in the product. They want good answers to come out, but you just want to seek the objective truth. So you don't want to ask leading questions. Likewise, open-ended versus closed-ended. If I say, did you like that feature? Your only response is really yes or no. If instead I said, hey, could you tell me what you thought about that feature? It's now open-ended, and the person has to kind of expand and not just do a quick yes or no. Definitely take notes and review them. Don't ask leading or closed-ended questions. As tough as it may be, if they're having UX issues, don't help them. I've seen people reach over and grab the mouse and click the buttons for the person. The point is not to get them through the test. It's to identify the issues. Definitely don't get defensive. I've seen some teams go, man, can you believe that user couldn't figure it out? If they can't figure it out, it's obviously your problem. Okay, so what are we actually gaining learnings about as we go through this, right? So in the problem space, it's all the hypotheses we had through all the different layers of the product market fit pyramid. Now in the solution space, you'll get all kinds of feedback, but I found you can tease it apart into three main areas. One is feature set or functionality. You basically may think in your MVP you've put in the required functionality, but you may get feedback from people saying, wait, this product's supposed to do X, then I'd expect the feature that does A, and I don't see that feature here. So you might get feedback about a missing feature, or you may think that feature Y is really important, but then when you test with people, they just go, I wouldn't use that, right? So that's functionality or feature set feedback. The second is UX design. If they can't find things, if they can't figure out how to use things, if they can't, if they're confused, if they can't successfully get through the flows, and that's the UX design issues. And third, I haven't talked about a lot, is messaging, and doesn't get talked about enough. Especially for new products and new features, the messaging really matters because you may not be using words that the person understands or conveys the meaning that you intend. And it's really easy to fix, but again, this is something that can cause rough edges for a user experience. Now, as we're iterating, basically, we're going to, like I said, we want to talk to people in waves of 5 to 8. And I like to use this idea of a product vector. So based on all of our hypotheses, we're heading in a certain direction in the problem space. We build a mock-up, or have a product that represents our hypotheses so we can get user feedback. We show it to them, and they go, well, I like this, I didn't like this, and they give us a little course correction, right? So we modify our product vector a bit. We revise our mock-ups. So go back and test, and they go, well, I like this, but I don't like this, and you go back and forth like that. So it's this weird thing where you're going back and forth between problem space and solution space between the waves. And if we go back to the hypothesize, design, test, learn loop, you can see that what we're doing is going through this loop, and we're going back and forth between problem space and solution space. When we form a hypothesis, we're in the problem space. When we design a UX, we jump to the solution space. When we test it, we're getting feedback in the solution space. Then we take our learnings in the problem space and revise our hypotheses. I want to quickly, for the end of the talk, run through a case study because people found this very helpful to apply the concepts. I worked on a project called marketingreport.com. The CEO had a new product idea. It was a small team, me, him, his VP of marketing and UI designer. And he didn't have a lot of dev resources, so he wanted to basically validate product market fit and see if there was a business opportunity without doing any coding at all. And the product concept was a marketing report that let you control the direct mail or junk mail that you receive. And there are a lot of parallels with the credit report. The CEO had worked in the credit industry, and so there's a lot of parallels with the idea of a credit report, but applied to the idea of junk or direct mail. And, when I sat down and talked with the team, they had a lot of different ideas. And the first thing I wanted to do was map out problem space, solution space, and what are the customer needs that we plan to address. And the core of the idea was find out what they know about you, they being the marketing industry. And the idea was, if I get a coupon in the mail for cat food, then it's because somewhere in some database it thought that Dan had a cat, right? And so the idea here is it would be a marketing report like a credit report, marketing score, which would be kind of like a credit score, and a marketing profile that would say, well, what do they know about me? Why are they sending me this? The other cluster of ideas was related to money-saving offers. So maybe I don't have a cat, but I have a dog, and rather than, I'd want to be able to say, hey, you know what, I actually have a dog. I wouldn't mind if you sent me coupons for dog food. That would be great. So that's money-saving offers. Maybe I want to compare how I'm spending and shopping to other people, and because social networking was hot at the time, we threw in social networking. The other cluster was more about reducing junk mail. So it's like instead of saying, it's like, hey, you sent me a cat litter coupon. I don't have a cat. I just want to be able to block that. Don't send me any more cat stuff, right? Some way to do that. And there was a secondary benefit of save trees. And so I laid this out on the whiteboard, and I said, okay, is everyone's ideas on here? Everyone said yes. I said, great. I looked at this, and I was like, this is way too big for a single product or a single MVP. And so I come up with the idea of doing two different MVPs. One is a marketing shield, which consists, again, the green in the middle, find out what they know about you is the core. And it was just a question, are we going to focus more on blocking, or are we going to focus more on getting you money-saving offers? So the shield was focused more on blocking, and the saver was focused more on, connecting you with money-saving offers you would find relevant. And so basically we created a set of mock-ups for each of these. Here's an example of the landing page of our mock-up, You can see it's not low fidelity, it's got some color, but it's not high fidelity either. We didn't put a lot of time and effort into detailed visual design, right? That's basically what we used. And then when you got inside, there was like a page that had these different modules, and that's how we mixed and matched between the two concepts. So the Saver one would have Saver modules, and the Shield one would have Shield modules, and they would both have the common modules that applied to both concepts. Okay, so we had our mock-ups. Next, it was time to get people, and we haven't talked about this yet, but when you have your target customer, it's really important that when you go and do research, you make sure that the people you're talking to are in your target market. Otherwise, you're going to get feedback from the wrong people that's probably going to send you in the wrong direction. So a popular thing to do that works really well is to write a screener. A screener is just a survey where you ask people questions, and you basically rule people in or out based on their answers to the questions. So, for example, we wanted people that work full-time and use the internet enough. And then we used what I call behavioral segmentation. So we said, hey, for the money saving, for the saver, they're probably already doing things to save money, like using coupons and having a Costco membership. And we should just ask questions about that. And likewise, for the shield, we said, if they care about privacy and security, they probably already have a paper shredder and caller ID. And so we just asked a few questions, and if they said yes to enough, then they qualified for that segment. We paid each person $75 for their time. I usually prefer to talk to people one-on-one, but the CEO wanted to go fast, so basically I scheduled people in groups of 2 or 3 to get that feedback more quickly, and I basically moderated them through the concepts for 90 minutes each to get their feedback. Now, what did we learn? We basically learned, and now I've got this map again, where now I've color-coded things. So things that had, relatively good appeal were green. Nothing was a slam dunk, but the things that tested best were in green. Yellow was some appeal, and red was like low appeal or no appeal at all. And so, the interesting thing was in the middle, the core concept to find out what they know about you, there was no green at all. There was nothing there that really resonated with people. And the marketing score people didn't really want that. So it was interesting because that, for example, would have taken a lot of resources and time and money, by doing this testing, I can say, hey, you know what, we don't need to spend any of those resources. So you hope there's some green, that you find some green, and we did find some green, right? So for the shield people, reducing junk mail, saving trees was green. And for the saver people, money-saving offers had appeal. And so step one is great, we found some green, but almost as important is we found some red that we can trim that fat and not spend those resources on, right? So now we had to decide, okay, this is basically the definition of a pivot. We started out with the core idea in the middle, and now we've got this island of green on the left to pivot on junk mail, to shield, or pivot to the right. We decided to pivot to junk mail because there was more appeal there, less competitive offerings, less biz dev work required, and it was more on brands. And so we completely pivoted. MarketingReport.com was gone. It was now junk mail freeze. Here's an example of a landing page. And we took all the detailed learnings we had about exactly which type of mail bothered people the most. Junk mail bothered people the most, like cash advance check and credit card offers. We put those there. Silly things, not silly things, but detailed things we didn't know about ahead of time. Like people were saying, oh, you're going to save trees. How many trees? So we put in save 43 trees, just to answer that question for people. So to sum it up, we basically did it. It was 4 weeks from that first meeting to validated concept with zero coding, reasonable cost. We did it in one round of iteration. I forgot to mention that both times we kind of asked people if they'd be willing to pay $10 a month for this service. The first time around, we really didn't get much interest at all. The second time around, we got a lot more interest. Now, people did say, "Hey, I need a 30-day free trial." But if it does what you say it does, I would gladly pay you $10 a month. And it's always a little iffy to ask people if they would pay versus actually, requiring them to pull out their credit card, because what people do and what they say they'll do aren't always the same. But we could see there was a marked difference. And then the other thing was, after the test was over, I was like, okay, great, thank you for your time. Here's your $75 check. Every user was like, is this out now? Can I use it now? I had to be like, no, sorry, we're developing it. It's not quite ready yet. They were like, can I give you my phone number? Could you please call me when it's available so I can sign up for it? So we didn't see any of that behavior the first time around, so we knew that we had achieved higher product market fit. Again, trimmed away non-valuable pieces, and we didn't do anything magical. We just applied the process that I'm talking about and that I cover in detail in the book, and you can achieve similar results. So again, the lean product process, step one is identify your target customer. 2 is figure out what the underserved needs are. Define your value prop as far as how your product's going to be better or different. Pick that core MVP feature set to test your hypotheses. Create a prototype so you can get it in front of people and test with customers, and then basically iterate through that loop and try to improve product market fit from iteration to iteration. So I covered quickly the 6-step process that I described in the book. It goes in much more detail. Also, because I mentioned I wanted to be comprehensive, I have a whole chapter on UX design. I have a whole chapter, once you've obviously validated with your clickable mockups, then it's time to build it. So there's a whole chapter on agile development about building it. And then once you launch it, you can use analytics. So there's 2 chapters on analytics. It's published by Wiley, hardcover ebook, and it's available on Amazon. And it's been doing pretty well. When it launched, it hit bestseller in starting a business category on Amazon, so I was excited about that. Real quick, I mentioned I run a meetup in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley. If you're interested, if you're nearby and you're interested, meetup.com/lean-product. We actually have a meetup on Thursday. We have a talented UX designer who's coming to talk. And with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions. Again, my Twitter handle's there. My slideshare.net link is there. If you want to learn more about, there are the links. And then I will, the SEAL's organizing a growth marketing conference in San Francisco, December 3rd and 4th. I'll be speaking on a panel there that looks to be a great event. I'm excited to be participating in that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today. It was a jam-packed webinar, and I felt that I received a crash course on how to build a lean product, and I'm looking forward to reviewing the video afterwards. Speaking of which, if you didn't get a chance to join the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending a follow-up email within 24 hours, so you will all get access to the video. And I know also that Dan, would you mind copying and pasting the link to the SlideShare presentation so everybody gets access to the slides as well? And I will add it to the follow-up email for our attendees. So it looks like we have time for a few questions. Sure. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box located on the left lower corner of your screen. far as we are running a little bit short on time, I'm going to combine a few questions from the audience. Let's start with that one. In terms of the framework that you put together for the webinar, Dan, do you think the same framework applies for both tech products as well as more complicated prototypes which you actually need to build? That's one part of the question. Then the second part, in terms of the lean process, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too many, but you mentioned also that you worked with Facebook, consulting them on their products. So would the process would be the same for a startup founder or for the enterprise company who's launching a new product, or would it be slightly different? If you can elaborate on nuances there as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a common question that I get. So the bottom line is, this process, when I started talking about mock-ups and things like that and showing a mobile app, that's where we kind of got more specific to software as far as web and mobile software. But the reality is, at the end of the day, we're talking about customer needs and how to, prioritizing which ones are going to create the most value and how our product can be better, different than others. That applies to any product space or product category or service for that matter, basically, right? So that all we're trying to do is basically apply science instead of art to get clear on, what problems are we trying to solve for people and how is our product going to meet those, meet those needs better than other products that are out there. And we're articulating our hypotheses and coming up with a way to test those hypotheses. So back to the first question about complicated prototypes, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a mock-up. If you've got a hardware product, it's obviously going to be a different kind of artifact, right? So I know early on in like the Palm Pilot development, they literally had like plastic or wood prototypes they would give people just to hold in their hand, and so sometimes you got those form factor issues with hardware, with real-world physical products that you can do. Those are examples of prototypes as well. I used to work on submarine design, pretty darn complicated, and we would build prototypes of certain parts of the submarine just to make sure that it was laid out and it would work the way that we expected. So the general idea is, to articulate your assumptions, hypotheses, figure out a cheap way to test them without actually having to build the real product, right? And certainly also with 3D printing these days, it's making it a lot easier for physical devices as far as rapid prototyping goes. But the goal, again, is to just identify your assumptions and figure out the quickest way to test those and figure out which ones are right, which ones are wrong, and iterate before you invest the hard, the hard resources and time. Make sure that you're kind of pointing in the right direction and going after the right thing. On the customer versus enterprise, same thing applies. I mean, at the end of the day, a couple things that come up that I mentioned in the book, when you have B2B or enterprise, you can have multiple roles. So, and this is true even B2C, but instead of just one target customer, you may have a buyer, right? Who makes the buying decision? It might be a different person than the end user. And so you need to have a separate persona for the buying customer. But again, they have needs, and they're distinct from the end users. They have needs that you need to meet. So, if you think of something like Salesforce.com, for example, there's the end users. There's multiple users, probably like a salesperson, a sales manager, maybe the head of sales. And then, at certain companies, it's probably not the head of sales that makes the purchase decision. So they're another stakeholder or target customer you need to identify, right? And then when it comes to actually talking to people, you're just obviously going to be targeting business people that match those personas when it comes to the time to test, as opposed to consumers, basically. But the principles definitely apply.
Great. And here's a quick follow-up question on that from Ray. In terms of the conducting customer interviews, what is your take on talking to individuals versus focus groups? What do you recommend, and what are the best practices when you are conducting both? Yeah, I mean,
on the book, I'm pretty harsh. I don't like focus groups. Someone just actually suggested doing one this morning. One of my clients, as an alternative way to get some feedback, and I just said no. Basically, focus groups are when you talk to like 6 to 12 customers at a time in a room around a conference table. And I've been in them and I've moderated them, and they usually devolve into like the people that are the loudest controlling the conversation, the people that are quietest getting, intimidated, not talking much. People will actually try to convince other people of points of view, so you don't get true opinions. you've got to worry about now not only the person thinking about judging what they're going to say, but now they need to worry about what other people are going to think about what they're going to say. It's well documented. You get groupthink in those situations, right? All of a sudden, everyone's thinking the same thing. So it's not a great way to get. I don't think it's a great way to get through. I personally prefer a one-on-one. And the potential allure of focus groups. Hey, if we talk to 10 people, it's like we can talk to 10 people for an hour instead of talking to one person at a time for 10 hours. I can save the time, but you're not really saving the time. And I talk about what I've covered today. You notice I didn't mention any A/B testing or any statistics or any analytics, right? It's very qualitative when you're building a new product. You need to get in there, and the difference between qualitative and quantitative is qualitative, like each interview matters. Each person you talk to, you care about the details. When it's quantitative, it's like we have 1 million users. You don't care about each user. You just care about in aggregate, what are they doing, right? So qualitative is the opposite. So you want to have those in-depth discussions. And I call that dichotomy Oprah versus Spock, or Oprah is the qualitative interviewer and Spock is the data-driven, numbers analytics person. And so that fake appeal of, hey, we'll be faster, we'll talk to 10 people, it'll be larger sample size or whatever it is, just doesn't fly because of the dynamics that I mentioned. So, and I mentioned in this example, I talked to 2 or 3 people at a time. That's the most I've ever talked to. And we had some no-shows, so a lot of times it was 1 or 2 people. But one-on-one is the best because the person feels more comfortable too, right? We didn't get into that, but they're sitting there feeling judged or worried about being judged about what they're saying. And so one-on-one, if you can build a good rapport at the beginning with the warm-up and asking good questions, then you can get the richest data from one-on-one.
Yep, makes sense. Thank you so much, Dan. It looks like we have time for one more question, and I want to wrap up on the note based on the previous webinar that we did together, where you talked about building products for growth. And in the wake of Startup Market, Growth Marketing Conference coming up also, I wanted to get your take on how marketing team should be working with product team. And especially right now in the Silicon Valley, there are a lot of new roles emerge, such as product marketing, product development. So what is your recommendation? Should marketers be involved in the beginning stage, or do you recommend them joining after? What are the best practices on how those 2 teams should be collaborating in the small organizations and in the larger one?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really good question, and the book is 335 pages. It's very comprehensive. If I had room or time to add one more chapter, it would have been on marketing. And in fact, I have a separate talk that's called Messaging Market Fit, right? We talk about product market fit. And I mentioned messaging a little bit in here. But messaging is really important, especially with a new product, to get it right so that the way you're talking about it. And that's where basically the product and the messaging obviously need to be in sync. You could have an awesome landing page with beautiful pictures and great words, and has an awesome conversion rate, and then people sign up for the product, and the product's a piece of junk, they're not going to come back, right? Likewise, you could have an awesome product, but if your landing page that explains it or promotes it doesn't do a good job, you're going to have a low click-through rate, low conversion rate. So they're very important, and they need to work hand in hand for sure. And when I was at Intuit, we would do focus groups. When we do the market research ahead of time, we did combined product and messaging. So not only would we say, confirm the problems that we were solving for people, but we would test different messages of how we would address those and see what resonated the most. So I've done combined marketing research, which is awesome. And it certainly can be done, back to your question about when, I think it should be done earlier, right? You can get marketing should not be involved later on. It's like already built, and now it's like, okay, how do we message this thing? The process, to give a quick summary, it's the same process all the way up through value prop, right? All the way through value proposition, product and marketing should be aligned that, hey, we're aligned on the same target customer. We're agreed that we're going to solve these problems for them. We're agreed this is how we're going to be better, different than the competition. And then from there, product is going to go work with design and dev to build it, and marketing should go and figure out, okay, how are we going to message this thing? That's where you guys can split. But if you're agreed all the way through the value prop, then you're very much aligned. And in that other talk that's on SlideShare called Messaging Market Fit, I walk through the process and then show what marketing should do after you agree on the value prop with some examples.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in for this webinar. Looking forward to seeing those of you. I see a few folks who registered for the conference or already attending the webinar. And the rest, hope to see you at the event at the future webinars. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day.